Hey there, Podcast Aquanauts. It's your host, Casey. I'm a longtime fan of state symbols, possibly stemming from my mother's stint teaching Tennessee history to middle school students. Whatever the roots of this interest, however, I am often amazed to discover that states have taken the time to designate official symbols for so many categories of items, from songs and poems to reptiles and agricultural insects. West Virginia's state tree, for instance, it's the sugar maple. The common loon is the state bird of Minnesota, and the desert bighorn sheep is the state mammal of Nevada. In North Dakota, lawmakers decided that the prairie rose should be the state flower, and up in Maine, the state herb is wintergreen. Down in Florida, the state reptile? You guessed it, the American alligator. Here in Tennessee, lawmakers have, at various times, taken breaks in their busy schedules to decide on the state amphibian, the Tennessee cave salamander, the state mineral, the agate, and the state fruit, which is the tomato, and probably ignited a lot of fruit versus vegetable debates in the marbled hallways of the state capitol in Nashville. There's even an official state beverage, milk, which is surprising coming from the land that gave the world Jack Daniels. In today's episode, however, we're going to dig into the important animals that are responsible for Tennessee's official gem, the freshwater pearl. As I hope has become increasingly clear from this podcast's discussions with scientists from the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute, Tennessee and much of the Southeast are home to an incredible richness of biodiversity that often dwarfs that of other regions and, in some cases, entire countries. The same is most definitely true of freshwater mussels. According to the University of Wisconsin Stephen Point's Mussel Project, there are a little over 1,000 species of freshwater mussels on Earth. Some regions are more mussely than others. For instance, there are just 31 native mussels in all of Australasia, only 47 across the entirety of Europe and Northern Asia, and 81 in sub-Saharan Africa. North America, on the other hand, is home to more than 300 species, almost a third of all species of freshwater mussels on Earth. And almost all of them are native to the Southeast, with 90% of all North American mussels found within a 500-mile radius of Chattanooga. From a reproductive strategy that sounds like the discarded plot summary of a Ridley Scott horror film to some of the most amusing names in the animal kingdom, these shelled invertebrates are hugely interesting animals, not to mention of vital importance to humans' access to clean drinking water. And to discuss all things freshwater mussel, I called up a quartet of our aquarists and scientists, all of whom are women. That is a pretty fitting cast for an episode that will run on International Day of Women and Girls in Science, wouldn't you say? All right, it's past time I clammed up and burrowed into this topic, don't you think? On with the podcast. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Podcast Aquatic, the official podcast of the Tennessee Aquarium. Today, I am here joined by 4 special guests. I have wavered back and forth about whether the focus of this episode should be about freshwater mussels or whether it should be about women in science, and that will all make a lot of sense once I introduce my guests for today. To my left is Avery Millard. Avery, you are one of our senior aquarists, correct?
Yes.
And a returning guest of the Podcast Aquatic. You were on our episode talking about the large stream exhibit in Ridges to Rivers. That was an early episode and one of my favorites. And you talked about a spawning event that happened in that exhibit that I hope maybe we'll see a repeat of in a couple of weeks,
hopefully soon.
A month or so.
Soon.
Avery, you can't just nod. You have to speak.
Oh, yes. I'm sitting on my
podcast.
hands, so I don't talk with my hands, but I can't talk with my head now. Yes, hopefully in a few weeks we'll see a new spawning event.
Oh, maybe we'll bring you back in for a repeat. And interjecting herself in that last statement to my right is Dr. Anna George. Anna, you are our Vice President of Conservation Science and Education.
So fancy, that title.
You've been on actually, I think of everyone here, you've been on
This is my third.
Your most episodes.
My third podcast.
Because you were also talking about the Endangered Species Act and most recently about the Laurel Days.
The race to save the Laurel Days. Absolutely. Do I get the MVP trophy now or at the end of the episode?
It's being engraved.
Perfect.
So hopefully by the time we're done.
Anna with 2 N's. Thank you.
And then now I don't know how to orient this. We'll go to your right. So we'll talk to Stephanie Chant. Stephanie, I think you're the only new person on the podcast. You'd never been a guest before.
I haven't. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And you're welcome. And what is your title?
I'm the conservation manager out at the Conservation Institute.
All right. And across from you is Rachel Thayer. Rachel, you are assistant curator of fishes.
Yes.
And you have also been on the podcast. You were our guest talking about science at zoos and aquariums.
Yep.
And we were probably going to talk about science in the course of this
I certainly
conversation.
hope so.
So I guess, as I said, I do not know whether this conversation is going to focus primarily on the fact that, as you might have surmised, all of my panelists today are women, or whether we should focus on freshwater mussels, which all of you have some sort of involvement in, and which the aquarium will be directing some of its efforts towards in the near future. So let's go ahead and begin by just we'll talk about freshwater mussels. So Avery, starting with you, what's your involvement in the aquarium's work with mussels, either right now or in the future?
So we are currently designing and building a freshwater mussel exhibit that will go at the end of Ridges to Rivers Gallery, which I was on the podcast previously talking about. But I'll be in charge of taking care of those mussels, and Stephanie and Rachel also went out and collected some of those, or all of those mussels that will be in that exhibit back in August. So I've just been trying to figure out how to display them best and keep them alive and happy and healthy.
And show off their muscleness.
Yes.
Like that's the thing about mussels, right? If you don't display them well, they look like a rock. Mm-hmm. And so I think the real trick here that Avery is glossing over is how do you display a mussel in such a way that every visitor can behold its magnificence?
Indeed.
Well, Avery, to put you on the spot then, how does one do that? How do you make mussels look interesting?
Well, I'm still trying to figure that one out, but
first you do a podcast about them,
yes,
and you really talk them up.
Then I get the really educators on my side, yep, and then hopefully we'll have some mussel shells that are in the exhibit kind of open so that people can see the nacre inside, which is the inside of the shell, and see the really pretty colors that they come in, and then hopefully show their burrowing behavior right up against the acrylic in the sand, and husbandly they won't just all be in the back kind of buried in the sand, which is their favorite place to be. But
it is a choice.
Yes.
I mean, this is a choice that we deal with in husbandry quite a bit, right? Like the animals would prefer not to be on view.
Perceived.
And the public would prefer to perceive them.
Indeed.
So you all are always doing this magnificent balancing act of like, how can I make this animal comfortable on view?
Well, through the magic of some well-placed video monitors and some great video clips of mussels doing some of their coolest behaviors, we hope that we can show off some of those things to guests when they come see the exhibit.
Because the behaviors are glorious.
Absolutely.
Like for an hour every year. They're glorious.
Yes.
They're introverted a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Let's continue working our way around the table. It's so hard to steer this runaway carriage.
Nope.
Don't do
we
it.
will not be steered, Casey.
All right. So Rachel, what will your involvement in mussel work, propagation, study, I don't know, public relations be as we move into the future?
I guess I'm a bit of a champion of invertebrates anyway. So if there is something that doesn't have a backbone in the aquarium, I want to make sure it gets noticed and gets highlighted and gets shared, and people learn why it's important too.
Alluding to your love of jellyfish and work with jellyfish.
Yes.
See previous episode of
See
the
previous
podcast
episode and maybe more episodes.
I hope so.
But yeah, so I was along with Avery, I think, part of the team that really nagged the right people to get us
Persuaded.
involved.
Persuaded. We are women in science. We do not nag.
Oh, correct.
Yes, we persuade.
Thank you, Anna. I persuaded quite professionally and effectively the right people to say, hey, we're the Tennessee Aquarium. We're in the hot spot of mussel diversity. Why aren't we showing these off? And I said it enough times to the right people and got a really great aquarist excited about having them in her gallery. And here we are.
So Stephanie, are you a malacologist? Is that accurate? An accurate description of you?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
I am. Yeah.
So-
I am a malacologist.
And then malacology is the study of mussels, correct?
Study of freshwater mussels. Yeah.
I frequently call it mycology, which is not
No.
accurate.
That's different.
fungus.
It's a cool one, too.
fungus.
It is very cool.
I do appreciate a good fungus, but yeah.
No slime molds, just mussels.
I didn't study them though.
So my introduction to you actually was on the trip that Avery mentioned, going to the Duck River, which I'm sure we will talk about in greater detail in the course of this conversation. But you have a background working with mussels in various capacities. Can you give us kind of a rundown of your experience with them?
Yeah, I can attempt to at least. I studied mussels for my master's research, and then I just kept working on them, even though people were like, no, you don't want to study freshwater mussels. You'll never find a job in that. And then every job I found since was that. And so one message I definitely want to share is follow your passions, because, yeah, when you're passionate about it, other people will be too. And I think that kind of sums up my career, hopefully.
Why are you passionate about mussels? What's the appeal?
I think it's like they said, like they are the introverts of the freshwater aquatic world. You know, they live down in the substrate. They do burrow down when it's cold and through a lot of the year, and then they have their big moment, and they look like just a rock. But then the more you learn about them, you learn that, you know, they can be an aquatic insect look-alike, a fish look-alike. Maybe they're just going to snare you in their slime. Speaking of slime. But one way or another, they're going to parasitize their fish host.
They're going to lure you in.
They will lure
They're going to lure you in.
Yeah.
I almost feel like, given what you're alluding to, that this could just as easily be a Valentine's, like a really creepy Valentine's Day episode.
I know.
creepy?
I was trying not to make it
Cool.
creepy. And I was also trying to think of my Valentine one-liner about mussels. And all I could really come up with was, I shell-ebrate you. And this
good one.
podcast.
All right.
That's pretty good.
Start. It's a good start.
I was gonna go with mussels. I find you alluring. Like I have to apologize to everyone because I meant to actually make us Galentine's Day T-shirts with that slogan, and then I know next year.
We could have had T-shirts.
Yeah,
It's
we could
not
have had
Valentine's
T-shirts.
Day yet.
January was rough for me, and I did not get all my intentions
Okay,
done.
well,
Also, Dave wouldn't design it for me. I don't know.
Dave Neely, your husband.
Yeah, my husband, and
Is
also
an
scientist.
also a fish
Also a
scientist.
scientific illustrator, but you know it's fine.
yeah.
I may have not given him sufficient time when I asked.
We could have
so-
said the heart is the strongest muscle of all.
That's why
That's
you're running this
sweet.
podcast.
Aw.
Yeah.
That's why Casey's in communications and marketing, and we're just scientists.
80% of my job is just puns. So
That's very true.
now, Anna, what experience do you have working with or studying mussels?
Practically none. I am here as the dissenting voice on this podcast to say that mussels are jerks because all they do is parasitize the fish that I love so dearly.
Okay.
So I'm here for
That's
that
what
bold,
fish are good for.
dissenting statement to rile up everyone else.
Because fish, it turns out, do have a purpose, and
That's
it's
right.
to help spread more mussels.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
we should probably explain this statement.
Since we have now talked about the fact that this could easily be a Valentine's Day episode, I didn't follow through on that. So let's follow through on that, because what you were talking about in being a fish lookalike or a what else did you say? What other kind of
Alluring.
Crayfish, alluring.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of teasers out there by now.
So let's talk about mussel propagation, right?
Have the malacologist explain that one.
Because that is one of I did not know anything really about freshwater mussels prior to us getting some fish into Tenacity, to the Conservation Institute, that were going to be used in the propagation of mussels. But I had no idea that there was this relationship that we've been talking about and kind of dancing around. So talk about, how do mussels make new mussels?
Yeah. So they have these elaborate lures, and they have a marsupium. At least that's what they call it. It's part of the mantle that secretes the shell. They use calcium, right, to secrete their shell, but they also use this organ to produce these elaborate lures that I've alluded to that do look like aquatic insects, that look like fish, that
And
might
they
look
kinda
like any
stick
number
up.
of things.
Right,
Yeah, they
like
stick up out of the
If
shell.
you're looking at a shelled organism and something pops out of the top of the shell and is wiggling
right.
around, that's what we're kind of trying to describe here.
Right. It would wiggle around, like whether it looks like a fish. Some of them even look like little snails. So
Some look like
just the
crayfish.
diversity. Yeah.
They're freaky looking, all of these things.
The crayfish is the
They're
one that threw me
amazing.
off.
Yeah, because
they
it
look,
like
Yeah.
moves. I mean, the whole thing moves.
It's
And
eerie.
Yeah.
You're like, this is a rock that's suddenly moving. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. Some of them have this beautiful blue color. And especially if you're in the river at night, which I highly recommend with a flashlight, and all safety in mind. But it literally just glows in the moonlight, and the fish are just mesmerized by the beauty of this little rock in the river.
What species is that?
That would be the oyster mussel.
Okay.
I recommend going to the Clinch River to see that one.
Okay.
That's kind of a redundant name, like ATM machine, the oyster mussel.
Well,
come on, people.
capsiformis, if you
Okay,
prefer.
that's better. We'll
make it a little
hey,
scientific.
We should explain, like, if you're a mussel and you only have a foot, right? You don't have feet, you have a foot.
They do
You
have
can't-
a foot, literally.
You can't really get too far with one foot. They're just going to kind of hang out where they are on the river bottom. And so when it's time for the babies to go off to, normally I would say college, but these are babies. When it's time for the babies to go off to, boarding school,
Nursery school,
you got to get them somewhere. And so mussels are relying on fish to be their baby transport. And they have to lure in the fish to convince them to do this. And that's where all these lures come from, is that mussels
the
are
lures
trying to convince
hold their
fish.
larval stage called a glaucidia. And that glaucidia, all those glaucidia are mini Pac-Man.
this is where it gets creepy.
Think
I think.
about being a nursery
It's been
for
creepy.
all these little Pac-Man things.
It
And some
hits
of
like
them
next
have
level.
little hooks even.
They parasitize the fish. You're
So-
dancing
Yeah.
around
Let's
the
talk
issue.
about the parasitizing
Yeah,
part.
you're
Yeah.
a little fish. You see a lure. I swim up to the lure, and then what happens?
So then the mussel, you might get a taste of it. So it really, it's about the mussel, because the mussel is putting itself in danger for the sake of its progeny, right? So the mussel tissue might actually get eaten by the fish. Some of the mussels are not so nice. They do tend to grab the fish's head and thrash them around a little bit. It's been known to happen. Especially for the Duck
Snuff
River
boxes.
darter snapper. Look it up.
Oh,
yeah,
there's a good name.
yeah,
Yeah.
some great names.
Oh, we're going to talk about names later. for sure.
Okay, yeah, that one's coming up. So it happens different ways, but yeah, the fish either takes a bite or the mussel will just kind of spew the glaucidia out into the water column, into the fish's face. Yeah, it can be kind of brutal.
There's no way to describe this. It doesn't sound really creepy.
No,
It
just
is really
doesn't
creepy.
sound good.
And also, since we're talking about women in science, we should point out that these are all female mussels.
Yeah, the females
is-
are who puts themselves
Yeah.
out there.
They're putting the risk out there to get their babies off to another part of river and dispersed. So this is, we can use pronouns here. She is putting herself at danger for her offspring.
Yeah, the males safely down in the substrate usually.
Okay, so the glaucidia have hitched a ride on the fish. What happens then?
They insist there in the gills or on the fence, and they hitch a ride. They go upstream, hopefully, and that's how they disperse. They'll stay there anywhere from a week to a month, and then they hopefully drop off into some really good silt-free sediment in the river bottom. And that is where they mostly live out their life. But like Anna said, they do have a foot, and so they do move, especially to avoid floods and droughts.
And when we say a foot, we're talking about a mussel, right? An MUSCLE of an MUSSEL. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're all clear then. Okay,
We're on the same page.
All right. So in the process of being carried around on a fish's gills, how is this? Is this harming the fish? Ooh, you're like trying to figure out how to. Okay.
I mean, sometimes.
How do you, have you ever had ringworm? Like, how do you feel?
Yeah, the immune system of the fish kicks in. So usually you can't use the same fish twice, which does lead me to believe, its body learned to deal with that annoyance.
I mean, look, if you're a parasite, it's not in your best interests to kill your host too soon.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta finish the stage of life that you're on. So it's not in your best interest to kill your host too soon.
As long as they get you moved to some better habitat, move you upstream a little bit, then you're good to go.
I'm thinking about that analogy that was very clearly told to us by a mussel guy, because it does kind of glosses over the parasitizing part of, like, if you imagine a mussel is an oak tree and a darter is a squirrel, then the squirrels are gathering the acorns, which are the glaucidia, and then just dispersing them somewhere else.
That's how a mussel biologist would tell
and
it.
that was what it was a mussel biologist told
Leaving
us
out
that.
the part that the squirrel develops an immune response to the acorns,
Yes.
which clearly means it's not
And
a
then-
mutually beneficial relationship.
It's probably fine after that.
Okay. Trying once again to steer this carriage back onto the track. How are mussels in general? How are they doing? Are they are they in a position of tenuousness? Are they in a position of strength? Do they have a lot of challenges to their survival? How are they doing?
So they are some of the most endangered animals in North America, for sure. That being said, they face a lot of the same challenges that the Aquarium and the Conservation Institute is working on already with a lot of other species that are at risk. They live in the same habitat. So when we're helping other species, I think a lot of times we are helping mussels. And the good news also is that freshwater mussel conservation is a real hot topic right now. And there's a lot of energy and a lot of resources being put towards freshwater mussel conservation.
Why is that?
Because they're super important as a part of their own ecosystems, and because of how endangered many of the species are. And people are a lot of people that study them are sounding some alarms because of how low numbers of some species they're finding out there. So I think that right now there are a lot of efforts being put towards freshwater mussel conservation. So it's an awesome time for the Tennessee Aquarium to get involved also.
More and more, we're talking about women in science and the fact that there's 4 women in the room here talking about freshwater mussels. When you go to the Freshwater Mollusk Conservation Society meetings or these big mussel groups, there are more and more women studying freshwater mussels, way more than you might see men in the room even. And I think part of it is just there's more and more hope now than ever. People still care.
So the reason why people should care about mussels disappearing is because would they be considered an indicator species of environmental health? Is that why we should be concerned that they're going away, or is it just
we should care because mussels are critically important to clean water? Mm-hmm. So I think the indicator species thing gets overused all the time in conservation.
I was going to say they're probably one of several so-called indicator species,
right? But it's also when things are going down the toilet, yes, there's problems. We know this. But what's so important about mussels, beyond all these super cool parasitism things, and they're just weird, is the fact that they are cleaning our water for us every single day for free as they feed. And so this is an incredibly important animal to have in high abundance in our rivers, because we all depend on these rivers for the clean water that we need to drink, to farm, for industry. All of that is possible because of things like freshwater mussels that are just out there chugging along every day, feeding, cleaning, moving slowly on their foot. They're cool little critters.
So
she said it. She said they were cool.
It's on
Edit that out.
It's on the record. So if mussels do such an important job of helping to clean our water, then could we just improve water quality overall in waterways by just adding more mussel beds, creating new mussel beds artificially?
Yeah, so people ask this question a lot, hoping for a single fix to any of the problems that our environment faces. And we're not about an easy fix hey, let's drop in cane toads to Australia because that's going to solve a conservation problem. It's not as simple as picking a species at will and releasing it anywhere you can and getting clean water that way. It's more the realization that all of these animals out there have both an intrinsic value to us just by the fact that they exist and that they belong in this world, but also recognizing that these are animals that are also part of making our world a better place. As cheesy as that sounds, we don't often like to go into the economic arguments because I don't think it's appropriate to say this species is worth more than that species. However, it's important to say that if we don't have freshwater mussels, we're going to pay more for the water that we get because there's going to be increased filtration costs. So as far as the Tennessee Aquarium is concerned, there are both ethical and economic reasons why mussel conservation matters.
And I think there's a pessimistic part of me that feels like whenever you can make an argument for conservation that does appeal to people's pocketbook, that is a valuable argument to make. It shouldn't be the whole argument, but I think it helps people to care when they might not otherwise care.
I think it's just important to know your audience. We could have a whole nother podcast. You just missed one, a science fight out at the Conservation Institute, just about this concept called ecosystem services, and how often should we as conservation biologists be playing up the economic value of an animal that we're working to conserve versus playing up that intrinsic value that this animal has a right to exist because it is here on the planet. For me, I am very practical, and I'm most likely to just learn more about the person I'm talking to and learn about their values and try to find an answer that is persuasive to the values that they currently hold. Because if someone does not see intrinsic value to a mussel, I'm probably not going to convince them of that. But if it's someone who is sitting here listening to the podcast Aquatic with the Tennessee Aquarium, they're probably going to understand more what I mean when I say we have an incredible diversity of freshwater mussels in the Southeast, and we need to protect that diversity and make sure that we are taking care of our backyard, because that helps those animals that live there, and it also provides clean water for everything else too.
So since you mentioned diversity here in the Southeast, I did want to talk a little bit more about the experience that we had last, I think you said August, going out to the Duck River. So I was just honestly gobsmacked going on that trip and seeing how many different, not only the number of mussels, but the variety of species of mussels that we found. And I don't know, how long were we there? Just a couple of hours, just wandering around. I don't even think we were being very focused in our effort to find them. We were just coming across them. So what is it about the Southeast that makes it such a rich place in terms of the biodiversity of mussels? And in particular, why is the Duck River so full of mussels?
Yeah, well, the glaciers never came this far south, so that helps, right, with all of our biodiversity. But all the fish biodiversity is a wonderful thing, and the Duck River is just really nutrient rich. It has got lots of good food for the mussels, but it's just a gem. I don't know. There's nothing else to say. It's just magical.
Let's give people some context. So how many species are found in the Duck River?
50 or so freshwater mussels in the Duck River.
How does that compare in terms of the overall number for maybe the state or the Southeast or the country?
Yeah, so there's about 140 in the state. I don't know about the entire Southeast, but in the country, you're looking at over 300 species.
It's around 300 for the Southeast. Roughly 90% of freshwater species in the U.S. are found in the Southeast.
Yep.
Okay, so about 1/6 of all mussel species in America are found in the Duck River. That sounds pretty incredible. I mean, I'm not a scientist, has been firmly established in the 20 or so episodes of this show that have been recorded thus far. That does seem like a lot to me.
It's a lot. It's amazing.
So when you were out, Avery, on that trip, you and Rachel and Stephanie, was it something that you were prepared for, that kind of level of diversity? What kind of impact did that leave on you to see that variety of mussels, this animal that you're going to be working with fairly closely in that one spot?
Yeah, I don't think I was prepared. That was kind of the first time I'd really seen like freshwater mussels out in the wild. And that was really cool. I've seen, obviously, we've been snorkeling for fish for many years, and just kind of realizing that those kind of go hand in hand, like our biodiversity of fish and also mussel species was really cool to see. We ended up getting 3 species that day, but we pulled up, probably 12 or 13 just within a few hours, and we were in maybe 100-yard span of the river. So that was really cool.
Yeah. You're nodding your head, Rachel. What was your experience like that day?
I had no idea what to expect because I'd never been collecting for mussels, and I wasn't familiar with the Duck River either. So it was just sort of a show up and see what happens kind of moment for me. But yeah, I was impressed, but also like thrilled that it was just like literally walk a few steps into the water and wait, is this one right? This is a mussel right here? Like we just took like maybe 6 feet forward into the water and there's mussels already.
Yeah. We were waiting for, I think Stephanie showed up a little bit later than the 3 of us. And I think I walked out not even, like you said, maybe 6 feet and just looked down. I was like, oh.
Wait a minute. Here's one.
There
right?
It is.
This is it, right? This is what we came to find? Oh, they're already like everywhere. Yeah.
And the two things that really kind of stuck out to me, I've seen mussel shells before. I'd never held a living mussel before. I was kind of surprised by how much they weigh, but also the colors. The colors of mussels were really kind of shocking to me because I think I had this impression of them being brown or just kind of monochromatic, and then you get there and you see just a real wide variety of colors.
They're actually more beautiful than marine mussels, if you ask me. So many different sizes also. Shapes.
They are big too, yeah.
The colors, not only on the outside of the shell, but the inside of the shells too, they range. Whites, pinks, purples, blues, like you mentioned. Beautiful, beautiful animals.
And we should point out that this was one of the economic values of mussels, is that they were originally used for button making because of those beautiful colors on the shells. You can still find shells with holes punched out of them because they were used for buttons.
Wow. And what did you say, Avery, that material is called? The nacre?
Nacre. Mm-hmm.
Nacre. Okay. And I wanted to talk about, you said we brought in 3 species and we encountered more than a dozen. When you were talking about them, Stephanie, and you started mentioning common names, and thank you for using common names because I don't speak science names. I don't speak Latin names.
They're so creative. Yeah.
I know they are. If you're going to know the common name of any group of animals, I feel like it almost has to be mussels. So I do want to know, what are some of your favorites? Because heel splitter is one of mine.
Yeah.
And then I looked up another one earlier.
There's a bloofer.
Oh, fat mucket was
fat
another
mucket.
one.
yeah. We're picking on that one. Pocketbook.
Washboard.
Slab
That
side
one's
pearly
pretty.
mussel. 3 ridge.
Warty back.
Warty-backs.
I like the purple warty back.
Yeah.
There's
Pigtoe.
a white warty back, a purple warty back. Yeah.
We actually, in
The
our
pistol grip.
hallway, outside of our offices, we have this really great poster that I wish we had brought that has like many representations of various species of mussels and their common names. And so you can walk down the hall and be like, which mussel are you? And now I'm like, we should invent the which mussel are you quiz.
Okay, I had to take a pause here. Due to nearly blowing out the studio dive cage's mics with their amusement, I have trimmed about a minute and a half of our discussion that was basically just peals of laughter from my guests as they discussed creating an online quiz for how people could determine what their freshwater mussel name should be. Suffice it to say, they didn't get very far in the process, owing to laughing too much probably, but I seem to remember it involving the use of your pet's name and possibly the street on which you grew up. Anyway, rather than subject your eardrums to that, I thought it'd be fun to pop out for a brief exploration of a few more amusing freshwater mussel species names. I can't stress enough how much I love that these are so completely off the wall, but yet can still be found in scientific literature and textbooks. From personal experience, I've found that scientists tend to default to using scientific, aka Latin names, when speaking to each other, and sometimes to the public if not properly trained, when they're talking about their work. Few things would delight me more than to hear an otherwise staid academic straight-facedly making reference to any of the following delightful mussels: the giant floater, monkey face, the little spectacle case, the orange foot pimpleback, the shiny raid pocketbook, fuzzy pigtoe. Anyway, those are some of my favorites, and I think they're done laughing now. So let's get back to the podcast. All right, why do we want guests to see and learn more about mussels? Why is that something that as a Tennessee Aquarium we should...
Did we not just convince them?
Well, I mean, yeah, but give me the elevator.
Perhaps there's some people that are still not convinced.
Give me the elevator pitch.
I think outside of them being very cool little organisms that live right here, there are not many opportunities for people in Tennessee to see an animal that has a counterpart out in the ocean, right? There are some things that, like, there is a marine, so to speak, version of it. Mussels are one of those things. And they live right here near you. Maybe you, like myself, like when you're at the beach to go picking up shells, and maybe that's what you really like about the clams and things that live out in the ocean. Mussels present the same opportunity. Please don't pick up ones that are live. But there are plenty of old shells laying around the Tennessee River, the Duck River, the Cumberland River, and they're beautiful, and you can enjoy getting to know mussels that way too.
Okay. What are you excited about people getting a chance to see in this exhibit, Avery?
I think just what a freshwater mussel looks like up close. Also, I guess going back to the previous question, just the fact, and Rachel's already talked about this, but the fact that we're just in like the best possible spot for if you are a freshwater mussel enthusiast or you're an aspiring freshwater mussel enthusiast. We are within driving distance of mussel shoals, of the Clinch River, of the Holston River, of the Duck River, all of these places. We're just at the epicenter of there are people that live in like Canada and of places further away that will come to Cleveland and Chattanooga to be able to go around and see how many cool freshwater mussel species we have around here.
That would be Cleveland, Tennessee.
Yes.
So north of Chattanooga.
Yes.
And it's a part. I've mentioned many times on this podcast that I'm born and raised in Tennessee. Had absolutely no idea that there was such a wide variety and a hot spot of biodiversity for mussels here in Tennessee. That was a real a pleasant surprise, we'll say, as I've learned more about them. So we're not just going to be exhibiting freshwater mussels, though. Can we talk a little bit about our involvement in the saving animals from extinction?
Wait, can I add one more exhibit thing before you move on?
Sure.
I think what makes the Tennessee Aquarium at our best is our ability to help people develop empathy for things they may not know about before they even enter the aquarium. And I think what's so incredible about the opportunity to exhibit and to educate on freshwater mussels for every single visitor that passes through our door is just that moment of connection with something that maybe you didn't know they existed before you arrived. Maybe you had heard of them and kind of shrugged. Or maybe you are that mussel enthusiast from Canada who is super stoked to be in Tennessee, which is the hotspot of freshwater mussel diversity. Whichever of those you are, I think the opportunity to develop empathy for something that is so unlike yourself, as animals without backbones are, these invertebrates are so different than us. And yet that's something that makes our world a little bit richer. And I'm so excited that we have the opportunity to do that for another group of animals.
I mentioned in your introduction that you're the Vice President of Conservation Science and Education. Are our educators already starting to think about how to approach incorporating mussels into their programming?
They're absolutely thinking about it. They actually adore working with the invertebrates because, a lot of our visitors come in and they've had a good experience with many of these animals. River otters, they are cool. They are fun. They're kind of jerks sometimes because they're mammals. But they've probably already encountered a river otter somewhere else. But when someone comes in and they see something like a mussel, that may not be an animal that they have any frame of reference for already. And those are really exciting moments for our educators, is to introduce people to something new. And so I hear frequently from the education staff that any of the new exhibits that involve invertebrates, those are their favorites to interpret, just because they're starting with a blank slate and no prior conceptions.
That's true. It's easier to teach somebody something new than to unteach something that they've already learned.
Totally easier. And it's a more memorable experience. Like, hey, remember that time we were at the aquarium and we met a freshwater mussel?
Yeah, I love it. It's easy to go out and snorkel and see fish, or, you may not even have to snorkel. And yet mussels are harder to see. They're down in the sediment. And I'm so excited about Avery's exhibit that she's going to be having these where you can actually see them.
Is it unusual in aquariums to have? I mean, I don't know, looking at other aquariums, are there other aquariums that have freshwater mussel exhibits, or are we on the fringes of that?
There are not many. There are a couple, and a lot of times these are exhibits that maybe don't stand out very well to the public, so we're hoping that ours is really eye-catching when you come see it. But there are a few places that do exhibit them.
I've seen more oysters,
Yeah.
I don't think that people have moved into the freshwater world.
I know of two off the top of my head, but I don't want to name drop them because I'm not sure if those exhibits are still open. But you're right. A lot of the other bivalves, especially marine ones, are probably more likely to be seen in aquariums. So this is, again...
Hey, you just science dropped bivalve. Can you explain that?
I'd love to.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. Bivalves are the group of animals that have shells and usually have two sides of the shell.
We haven't actually talked about the schedule for this. So we've mentioned an exhibit. Avery, do we have any idea when that exhibit might go live?
We will just say at some time in March.
Okay, but this year
Hopefully.
then?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Soon, yes.
I think
Yes.
it'll be before April.
Yes.
But we have things to wait for, like the actual display tank is being fabricated, and then the construction of that system in the gallery. But once it's here, it should be pretty quick. So
Yeah, if you have any illusions about us just popping an exhibit in and that's the sum total of the work that goes into it, I do encourage you to go back and listen to the episode with Avery and another senior aquarist, Ben Stinger, talking about the work that went into creating the large stream exhibit that I've name dropped a couple times already in the Richest Rivers Gallery, because there's a lot of work that goes into it. To everyone at this table's credit, I think there's just a lot of groundwork that has to be laid before people are able to experience an exhibit in its entirety.
first you have to ask, can we have a freshwater mussels exhibit?
Was that a
Persuade. First,
What-
you have to persuade.
was that a difficult request to make? I mean, what was the response immediately? Did you have to sell it pretty hard, or were they receptive to the idea?
I think it was mixed. I'll say it was mixed. There are some people. I mean, I would not say that anybody did not see the value in the exhibit. Right. We know that freshwater mussels are a big part of what we do and what the aquarium stands for and the work that we do. It is hard to convince people outside, I think, of especially husbandry and science to think, okay, but how are our guests going to come up to an exhibit that's not super, like, doesn't have a lot of movement in it?
Not very dynamic looking.
Yeah, that's the key word, dynamic. And that, the animals might be hidden most of the time. How are we going to get our guests to be excited about something that looks like that? So there was, I think it was, if it was challenged, it was challenged to make it better and in the right ways.
So we've talked a lot about the mussels at the aquarium. We've talked about mussels out in the wild. We haven't really talked about our work with mussels at Tanasi. So is that something that now that, Stephanie, you joined the staff in your current role last year, is that right?
This past year, yeah.
Okay, so now that you're here with the background that you have, is it more likely that we're going to become more directly involved in working with freshwater mussels? Anna is making gestures.
Anna hopes so. Yeah, absolutely.
Anna is so excited to announce our
Anna's
new
making a lot of
freshwater
faces.
mussel task force.
Absolutely. And we're not even sure what that looks like yet. We know that you alluded to the Mussel Safe program earlier, which we'll talk about and define in a second. But I think the biggest part of what they see there is a need for more education. And so we're looking at ways we can get more involved in that way.
Okay. So, well, let's talk about the SAFE program. So SAFE is an acronym, Saving Animals from Extinction. It's a sub-program or a program that's under the AZA, so the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So let's talk about the SAFE Freshwater Mussels program and our role in it.
Well, it's a brand new program. It's just getting off the ground. I think it's like 2 years old at this point. So we are really getting in at the ground level, which is great. So we will probably take on a public education kind of role in it with the exhibit and with our education team, and we'll see where that leads. But as a new program, I know they have different areas of focus. They do have some people that work on propagation of mussels and reintroduction programs, and then there are people that are just trying to do more public education of freshwater mussels, and there are probably people working on policy and things like that that affect freshwater mussels.
I think we should probably back up and say that SAFE programs, Saving Animals from Extinction, are conservation programs that exist when multiple zoos and aquariums come together because they're all interested in working on the same conservation project together. And SAFE programs are extremely variable depending on what the organism is that the program was established to help. And so some of them are SAFE programs for things like elephants. Some of them are SAFE programs for things like freshwater mussels. And what's unique about SAFE programs is that they're very dependent on the institutions that come together and what their strengths are. and they create the plan together. And so we say it's relatively new. We also say it's 2 years old. If you've ever worked in a partnership with other organizations that are spread across the country, and you probably only see each other once per year at an annual conference, you can understand how those two things actually do go hand in hand. That it's just a little hard to get all these partners together to make good joint decisions on how we're going to go forward. But as Rachel just said, there's always a strong education component to these programs. There's also typically a strong exhibits component to it, because that is one of the main ways that we can engage in education. And then there's likely going to be expertise in propagation techniques for raising and releasing mussels back into historical habitat where they're not found anymore.
Okay. So we are going to be doing our part then to kind of raise the profile of them. Is that fair to say?
We're in a raising awareness mode, basically. So we want to make sure that people who live around mussels know that they live around mussels. We want them to see why they're special and why they deserve a place in our rivers and streams.
Awesome. There's no easy way for me to segue from discussion of mussels to the other element of today's podcast that I don't want to. I feel at this point like our runtime's running a little bit long, and I don't want to pay just lip service to this, but I did want to touch on the fact that, as we've kind of talked about in the course of this discussion, everyone on this panel is a woman, except for me, obviously. And I think that's important for a lot of different reasons. And I was looking at the statistics about women in science. And was shocked that in the year 2025 that only about 30% of researchers are women, which is shocking to me. Is it a number that is surprising to you, or is it something that you just kind of, being in science, you're not surprised to know that?
I wonder which kind of research that encompasses. It seems like it might be a broad category of research, meaning maybe it's biomedical research, maybe it's chemical, maybe it's every science field, because I do think that number is low for conservation sciences and animal sciences, zoology, all of those sort of animal-focused research fields.
So women would be better represented in those fields?
Absolutely. This is, especially in animal husbandry, is by far a female-dominated field.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that women may be drawn to it because it is a nurturing profession. They may be drawn to it because animals are literally the coolest things on the planet that we inhabit, and we get to share the planet with them.
Well said.
I don't know. I think most women and other people that go into the field don't necessarily have like a reason why it was the thing for them. It just was.
I was going to ask. I was going to go around the table and ask why did you want to pursue a career in science? And maybe that's not the right question.
I don't know. Sometimes science finds you.
That's what I would say too.
Just like the mussel glycidia.
Just like
I tied it together for you. You're welcome.
It lures you in.
You were lured. You were lured.
Yeah.
Maybe we were lured.
We were lured in.
I don't recall.
I don't recall a time I didn't want to work with animals. So it's hard for me to answer that question, because at 5 years old, I was dragging my family to zoos because I wanted to see animals. So I can't answer your question because it was just there.
Just always been part of the background.
Animals have always been part of the background for me. They're not the background; they're the foreground.
When I was 4, I wanted to be a piggy bank.
That's not what I expected.
How did that work out for you?
I didn't get there, but I did later on in like 4th or 5th grade realize like, oh no, wait, I want to work with real live animals. And then that was it from then on.
Avery, do you have a story for your origin story for how you got into science or became passionate about pursuing science as a career?
I think just the same as what everyone else has said is I've kind of always loved animals and always knew I wanted to work with them. And then I think equally important was that I was never really told or shown that I couldn't. So that was also very valuable. Like, I think a lot of representation was really important, seeing like I used to come here growing up, and there were even like a lot of women zookeepers and aquarists here back then. So I think that was always really important to me too.
Good point.
I wanted to be Jane Goodall. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, yeah. Same.
I remember, same as Anna said, like just animals were always it for me. They were the foreground. But when I saw Jane Goodall in a documentary in, 4th grade or whenever, like that was it. It was the coolest thing ever.
That's a representation too. Like that's,
absolutely.
a woman well known by people all over the world doing real science, making it seem like something that you can also do. Because it is something that you can also do.
I learned about freshwater mussels then, took it even further and never looked back. It was all it for me.
So
to take this full circle.
As a father to 2 daughters, I will say that, and someone who has also been passionate about science in my own way. I am not a scientist, but I am passionate about science, and have been my entire life. It's heartening to see. I have the 4 of you here at this table, and to work with so many amazing women here at the Aquarium and at the Conservation Institute, and to see in your roles a future path for them. So, I mean, I guess thanks for doing what you do, because it does give me a lot of hope for if this is something that they also exhibit passion in, that they can pursue it, and hopefully it'll be even more representative in the future.
Most likely, yes.
Yeah.
And you have a daughter as well. So
I do.
She's
10, and she is, I don't know what she's going to be. But
and that's okay.
Yeah, she's going to find it herself.
That's okay. All right. Well, I hate to have just barely touched on such a big topic as women in science, but I think we did a pretty good job of covering at least the mussel side of this conversation. So I will end by saying thank you very much to Avery, to Rachel, to Stephanie, and to Anna for taking time out of their busy schedules to come in and talk about mussels with us on this Galentine's Day, International Day of Women in Science, and just general love of mussels podcast.
I was told there would be waffles.
Anna was responsible for waffles. So
of Galentine's Day.
she was in charge of t-shirts and waffles.
Weird fail. Waffles.
There's still
T-shirts
time
and waffles.
for the t-shirts.
They do kind of look like a mussel foot.
We're out.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Podcast Aquatic. If you have any ideas for a future episode of the podcast, or a question for someone like Avery or Stephanie or Rachel or Anna, send it to podcast@tnaqua.org. And in the meantime, until next time, remember that every drop matters.